So we're gonna prep the starter, get out the scale, the rye flour, and the unbleached white flour. And of course, we want our starter. I pulled that out of the fridge last night. So what I do, I like to keep my starter in the same container that it lives in forever, but the goal is to get it to 25 grams. So what I do is I take a jar that has the same exact weight, put that on the scale, tare it to 0, and then put the jar with the starter on the scale. And the number that you eventually want to see is 25 grams. So as if it started at 100, you keep pouring out the starter until you see 25 read on the scale, which is a lot less than you think. Look at that. So little in the jar and so much that came out into the bowl. And when I remove the starter, I put it into a separate bowl and then I can cook it later. And now we are putting in our 50 grams of all-purpose white flour, unbleached. Really getting that exact weight. And moving on to the rye. With this one, I like to just dump it directly in. You don't even need a spoon. Okay, now that those two have been poured in, by this point I've already prepared a pot of boiling water and dumped it out, and you can see with this temperature it's hitting 100 degrees, which is too hot. We want to get it to 85. So I keep my filtered water next to me handy, and I pour in enough water where the temperature reaches around 85 degrees, which I have found to be the secret to my success with getting nicely raised sourdough starter. I used to do too hot of water, and I would just finger test, see if it felt hot enough, and I went too hot back then. This is like very lukewarm temperature. So anyway, now you gotta mix it all together, and I am cutting into various clips of me mixing it, and I think this in total took me about a minute or two. But now this is the mix result. You want to get no dry spots in there. Don't forget about the bottoms and the corners because those will sneak up on you. And clearing out the spoon, get all that goodness back into the jar. And last but not least, move your rubber band to the top part of the sourdough starter. You could zhuzh it around to flatten the layer, kind of like if you had a cake pan and you're trying to level it. It doesn't have to be super accurate. And that's it for that step. Now you just wait for the starter to double in volume. So at this point in my video, the starter has doubled in size. You can't really see it in the jar, and you might be asking, how do I know my starter is ready? Well, you can do the water test. So you put a little bit of your starter in a glass of water, and if it floats, it has enough bubbles in it, which means it's active enough. So I'm mixing my first portion of the dough, which is part starter, part water, and part salt. So the starter, I like to start with 75 grams. It won't be your entire jar, which is good because if you want to, you can refeed it and use that to bake another day. So 75 grams starter, 10 grams of salt. I use kosher salt, and then water. So the ingredients say like 420-ish grams of water, depending on the temperature. I actually used to do too little water because I thought the humidity here was more than what I was used to. But actually, I had too little water for a couple bakes and the dough didn't rise properly. So I think, and then once I added water back in, the starter was happy. So yeah, just go with the bottom number in there. I actually put too much water and I had to dump it out. And I kept this in here to show that it doesn't have to be super exact with the water. I know sourdough baking is all about measurements for consistency, but some things you can play around with based on your environment. So here I am mixing everything together. You want the starter in there to dissolve in the water. It doesn't have to be completely dissolved, just mix it in. And now we add in the flour, and I'm pointing at how it is bread and how bread flour really upped my game from just AP flour, because something about the proteins in this flour is higher, therefore developing more gluten, therefore bouncier, chewier, and just overall like a better texture. So this I always weigh 512 grams. Apparently that's about 4 cups of flour, but I have not used a cup measurement in this process in many, many bakes. I just stick to my scale. And you mix it in. So do your little foldy fold. It'll become like a shaggy dough toward the end. It might be super sticky. It looks like this. Kind of sticky, but everything's like sticking together. And you just cover and wait. If you have time, in 15 or 30 minutes, try to perform a series of stretch and fold. I'm showing that here, and it's not as elegant because I was using one hand to hold the video camera, but you kind of take the edges and then pull them into the center, and that will help shape the dough to be from like a kind of shaggy blob into at least a ball-like structure. And now you cover and you wait for a couple of hours while this doubles. So see ya. Hello, hello, we are back and we're gonna check out our dough. And it looks like it has risen according to my face. It looks like this. It doubled, it's poofy, it has a nice little bounce back. I experienced a bit of a jump in time. Usually at this point, when the dough has doubled, I just throw it into this glass pan. And there is a silicone mat down there, but normally I lay down butter and oil to make sure that's greased so that it will be less problematic when I take it out of the bake. But I tried the silicone mat this time, and it actually worked pretty well. It crisped up enough at the bottom, and it was like absolutely no hassle to take it out. So that's worked well for me, but again, like anything nonstick you may have, butter plus olive oil works well. If you have a spray, you can use the spray. But do put olive oil at the bottom so it can crisp up. Okay, here is a section that I did not film, but at this point you wait another 4-ish hours to let it rise a second time. And now we are back and ready to bake. So put your oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and now you are going to
make your dimples.
Put on some olive oil at the top of your dough, and now just push out and
create those dimples.
The focaccia should have a nice spring to it,
and the dimples will stay intact.
This time around is not the best visual, but work with me here, use your imagination, and just fold so that the dough can spread to the ends of the pan. So by this point, like the dough might not fill the entire pan, and that's okay. So what you're doing is spreading it out to make it even. And then you put your toppings, like sprinkle some salt and some rosemary up top. And then you bake it in the oven, and then you take it out after 25 minutes and enjoy. Alright, so time for some bonus material. You might be wondering, what do I do with all that starter that I had to discard at the beginning? Well, here is a recipe for you if you don't feel like wasting it. I like to make sourdough pancakes. So first I heat up some olive oil in a pan, and then I put in a little bit of the starter to make sure that it is making a nice crispy sound. You want it to be hot enough. It wasn't hot enough at first in this video, but now it is. You can see the oil is shimmering. When that happens, I put the rest of the dough, the sourdough discard, in here. And I didn't do it in a very circular fashion, but that's okay. This is very forgiving. I use a spoon to move the top part of the batter to the edges to form a more circular looking pancake. And at this time, before you flip it, you can put any toppings you want. Cheese, green onions, olives, what have you. It's nicer to put on this side so that it sticks before it flips. And then you can also drizzle more olive oil on top so that it doesn't stick or stay burning. So here you can see I created some green onions. I cut some up and put them in there. And now you have a nice snack, which is best enjoyed with some soy sauce, or you can eat it by itself or treat it as a flatbread for another bread dish that you may have later. And enjoy.